Hello and welcome back to the June 2022 edition of Real Estate Live UK. Thank you for joining this, our Freeports focus session today. The Real Estate Live UK programme takes place 3 times a year and is brought to you by White Label, our partners and sponsors. So before we get underway, we'd like to thank our partners and all those organisations contributing to our panels this week. Places across the UK have been showcasing themselves to investors and developers, and industry-leading experts are exploring ideas on how the property and regen sectors can continue to thrive in discussions including built-to-rent growth, how to create life sciences clusters, digital engagement platforms, the rise of the industrial logistics sector, and the role of culture in creating and sustaining communities. You can find out more about all our sessions by visiting our website, realestatelive.co.uk. Right now, of course, we ask, how will new Freeports impact the industrial logistics market? Which is one of a series of sessions, part of our Last Mile annual events programme. Just before we start, I'd like to remind you, the audience, please feel free to ask questions using Zoom's Q&A function. Now, I'm pleased to hand over to our chair for this session, CoStar editor Paul Newman. Over to you, Paul.
Hi, yes, thank you very much. I'm Paul Norman, managing editor in Europe for CoStar News, which is part of the CoStar Group and a commercial property news service. Just before I introduce our panel, just to say what we're focused on is Freeports and how they're impacting the industrial market in particular at the moment. Obviously, they were introduced in the spring 2021 budget with the government very much seeing it as one of its key, post-Brexit policies and levelling up policies, and announcing the first wave of free ports, 8 new locations in England, with plans to set up further additional free ports in Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland. As these are taking shape, we're beginning to see what they are bringing to local economies and how they can support current and new businesses, as well as obviously the huge impact they're going to have on industrial and logistics surrounding that. We'll be asking a lot of questions about that. So just to introduce you to the panel first, and then I'll kind of just quickly lay out the agenda. We have John Lucy, Director of Liverpool Freeport, Liverpool City Region Combined Authority, Richard Ballantyne, Chief Executive of British Ports Association, and Sir Chris Haworth, Non-Executive Chair at Gateway 14 and the East Midlands Development Company. I'm going to ask each of them something specific relating to their part of the Freeport world first, and then I will start asking a couple more questions, and you're positively encouraged as an audience to start feeding in questions in the bottom of the screen. You'll see them on the webinar there, Q&A questions, and I'll try and get to them as well as we proceed. So without further ado, I'm going to turn to John Lucy first and ask, how has confidence grown in Liverpool City Region, the industrial and logistics sector, since the Liverpool Freeport announcement, and bring us up to speed with it. Where are we now at Liverpool's Freeport?
Okay, thanks, Will. So first things first, the Liverpool Freeport is probably about 90% completion before we actually go live. Our business case has been pushed into government. We're just going through some critical actions as we speak now. And all being well, we expect to be going live somewhere around about the September, October time this year. So we're probably a month or two behind one or two of the other Freeports, but certainly given the scope in the region of ours, the Freeport for Liverpool is anything but the port. It's a 45 kilometres over, stretching out as far as the Port Salford down the end of the Manchester Ship Canal. So I think in terms of the interest from the logistics sector, this is probably one of the biggest sort of regeneration or stimulus to the area in terms of manufacturing, bringing new industries in that we've seen in decades, really. And so my take on this in terms of the logistics sector is there's two factors at play here that we're considering. One, we have these tax sites where there's 6 real well documented now tax breaks for new investments onto that. We've got something like 660 hectares of development land in 3 sites stretching from the Wirral, Halton, and our biggest site is at Parkside at St Helens, which is the M62, M6 across there. So that particular site is attracting a lot of interest from some of the big names in the logistics sector. In terms of geography, really, it's really, really well placed to reach other parts of the country, more so than some other these logistics parks, and this actual area has got the potential to be probably one of the biggest logistics zones certainly in the north of the UK, and perhaps even in the entire UK, because there's 3 phases to it. This entire site is so large; it's a former colliery. So there's that side of it as well. So the physical infrastructure builds for the logistics companies themselves to set up, but also because of the new businesses that we're hoping to attract in terms of new cutting-edge businesses, which are going to complement the existing industries that we have in terms of automotive, aerospace, life sciences, etc. This is a sort of a chance in a generation, really, for the entire supply chains to sort of sit up and take notice. And we're seeing a significant amount of interest. And although it's called a free port, it's a free zone. We've got 3 global gateways. We've got the port itself. We've also got the airport, which has seen a significant amount of increase in air freight. We have a multimodal rail terminal, which is 2 trains a day, which could be increased to 7 trains a day, connecting to other free ports with containers from around the country. So there's huge stimulus, I think, for the logistics sector, and geography, as ever, serves our purpose particularly well in terms of global trade and becoming a global trade hub for the future. So we're very, very positive news for the logistics sector for Liverpool Freeport. Thanks, Paul.
Thank you, and a huge amount to tell people about there, opportunity-wise. And yeah, Richard, coming to you. I mean, looking across the whole picture, what's the sort of impact it's already having in terms of supporting growth in industrial and logistics? Obviously, different story at different free ports, as we're hearing.
Yeah, thanks, Paul, and it's great to be with you, and great to be speaking alongside the likes of John Lucy, who's doing a huge amount, I have to say. So credit to him. I think I'll just kick off, Paul. And I haven't got that long, but just kick off by recapping, what the vision is for Freeports. They're essentially providing zones for investment, for growth, for development, etc., around areas that may have been described as being left behind, etc. And the government is using this as one of its tools for the levelling up agenda. And we're very excited, as you can imagine, being a ports association, that ports are seen as the vehicle for this development investment. And indeed, we've been lobbying for sort of similar policies over the last few years. So we're excited this is now coming to fruition. The kind of slight two cautionary words I'd say is, one is these free ports will probably need a bit of time. Then I'm sure they're going to hit the ground running, and I'm sure John's got a list of people interested in setting up. But there is going to be some patience needed from policymakers who tend to need things to be ready in time for next elections, if that's not being too cynical, if you get what I'm saying. And also there is...
I don't think it is, no.
No, and also there's a big machinery that is both government locally and nationally. And, local authorities who are going to be actively involved in these things at a certain level do need to understand that business needs to be allowed to get on with what it needs to do, etc. And the other point I'd make is perhaps a wider point, which John may well disagree with me on, which is about the need possibly for, whilst we understand the government's aspiration to limit the number of free ports, we can't neglect other regions. And I think it's probably unlikely that there'll be a future tranche of free ports anytime soon, other than in the devolved administrations. But let's have a look at some of the levers and see whether they work for both ports and airports, but other entities around the country. But look, delighted to be here. Happy to take any further questions when we get the debate going.
Yeah, and we'll obviously come to a lot of those issues going forward. But you talked of a kind of magic immediate story coming to Sir Chris now. Obviously, a huge announcement yesterday on the project you're involved with, huge win. I'd wonder, I guess, how's the introduction of free ports to the East Midlands and East of England benefited Gateway 14 and the East Midlands Development Company? I mean, is it wrong to see the deal with the range that we saw yesterday as a massive response? They certainly mentioned it in their when they were talking about it. It seems like an early win anyway.
Yeah, well, you're stealing my thunder now, Paul. No, it's certainly very good news indeed. I mean, talking about Gateway 14 and Freeport East, first of all, I mean, when we set up Gateway 14 at the end of 2017, it was something done by Mid Suffolk District Council. We were looking probably at a 12 to 15 year timeline in terms of how we bring it forward. Actually, that has the introduction of the Freeport has completely revolutionized that, and there's no doubt about it that it has had a very significant effect on the level of interest and the occupiers coming in. And as you mentioned, yesterday we announced the deal done with the Range for a building of 1.17 million square feet. And when we were first looking at Gateway 14, we thought, well, if we can produce 1,700 jobs for the area, that's going to be good off the site. But actually, we're already achieving that with what we've agreed with the Range. So it's going to have a huge impact on the area, and it's really brought forward the timing of what we're delivering. Then moving on to the East Midlands and the East Midlands Freeport. The East Midlands is an area that's got enormous potential. It really has. But in some ways, it's the classic example of somewhere that's been left behind. It hasn't done as much as perhaps as the West Midlands or Manchester or even Yorkshire or whatever. And it is an area that's been left behind. The good thing about the Freeport there is that, again, this is the only inland Freeport. Of course, it has the airport as part of it, but it's 3 sites. But there's a site in Derbyshire, there's a site in which is the logistics site there. There is the airport site in Leicestershire, and there is a Ratcliffe-on-Soar power station, which is in Nottinghamshire. And one of the key things about sort of bringing the East Midlands up is getting some sort of political consensus moving forward, so that there really is a concerted effort to bring those forward. So at the East Midland Development Company, our role really is uniting all of those, bringing it forward, working very closely with the Freeport to deliver that. So I think certainly the Freeport designation there is extremely important.
Okay, thank you so much, all of you. Now, just to say, I think Richard mentioned perhaps we haven't gone into much depth yet about what Freeports actually benefit from, and probably a good time to look at that. I just wanted to ask you all, what, and I know it was an evolving story from government, what they were going to add that were the benefits within a Freeport, and that's changed and evolved, and I'm sure it will continue to. What are the most important measures that Freeports have to attract and stand out here, and what additional measures should be introduced to ensure Freeports will support the UK's industrial and logistics sectors? And I guess I come to Richard first there.
Yeah, thanks, Paul. Great thing to kick off with, actually. So I'll probably miss some of them, actually. So John and Sir Chris can correct me. But effectively, I would say the kind of big thing that we managed to get in the Freeport's criteria is the tax advantages. So, not only can you build things cheaper through preferential capital allowances, there's also other things like business rates, waivers, and compensation from central government to local authorities for that loss of revenue, and also things like employee national insurance contribution waivers. So salaries up to a certain threshold, I think it's 25,000, are exempt from that. And one or two other little things on the tax side that, generally would incentivize people to come in and build things, develop, set up, etc. Then we, the other areas, things like trade and customs policy, you can exempt goods in a more traditional Freeport, free trade zone style. Although it has to be said, you can do some of those things already through the HMRC. It's just this makes it easier, and the longer these things are up and running, I think the more attractive they'll be for people to come in who haven't got that experience of, customs and approvals from the HMRC, etc. So I think those things will grow and develop. You mentioned just very briefly, you mentioned what else could they do, and I'm sure Sir Chris and John have got ideas around involvement from local stakeholders and local authorities and other things. But one thing we're very keen on is the planning side of things. So, permitted development rights is always talked about in the airports and the port sphere. And there have been some tweaks to the permitted development rights. So effectively the pre-consent for developments up to a certain threshold. Now, they're not particularly amazing. There's still a planning process to go through, and local development orders might be something to look at here. But I would say there's definitely a bit more work needed in the planning front, because it's all well and good having an attractive investment regime. But if people want to come in and do things, they don't really want to be hamstrung by, delays to consenting processes, etc. Even if, local planning offices and others are energized and starting from a point of view of approval. I think there's more to be done there.
All right, that's great. And yeah, coming to you, Sir Chris, what are the most important measures within Freeports now, and what else would you like to see? I mean, what are people saying to you? Well, that's really important for us.
Well, I think, Richard summed it up very well there. It is particularly the tax incentives for occupiers being able to get in there and really just get on with their business. And yeah, all the benefits, I think, which Richard mentioned. I think one interesting side to it, which again has been part of our discussion with the range, is the sustainability. And so I think it's something that is so important to occupiers, to their customers, and everybody else at the moment, and to all of us at the moment. There is this huge potential in that. So I think any extra incentive that the government can give in terms of Freeports for sustainability measures, I think would be extremely helpful as well. But generally, it's working well. We just got to make sure that the process is smooth. It doesn't get too mired in process. I mean, if people want to be able to get on and run their businesses and do what they do without too much interference, but one recognises, of course, there needs to be the process as part of that.
Okay, John, coming to you in terms of the Liverpool view on this as well, as you say, as you work through with government realising it. Just seeing if what the particular measures are most important to you, and any others you'd like to see.
Yeah, sure. Our view is there's two sides to this, really. The tax benefits, as Richard and Sir Chris have described, they're basically going to turbocharge developments onto these, challenged areas in a challenged region, which is fine. But we need to make sure that this is not just a 5-year flash in the pan policy sort of thing. To really level up and regenerate, our port city regions. This is minimum 25 years strategic direction, and that's the view that we're taking on this. So yes, the tax site development, we're very, very confident that that's going to be successful. It looks all the signs are there that it's going to work, and Sir Chris is describing already. They've gone live. It's starting to work in other free ports around the country, so don't anticipate any issues there. Our ask really, and as our model is developing, is we have 6 local authorities within Liverpool City region. But probably, I'm not sure if any of the other Freeport regions have that many local authorities.
Yeah.
So three are winners, if you like, in this, because they've got the big tax sites, so they're going to benefit from the business rates relief, etc., and the impetus into those regions. We already, and we haven't even gone live yet, Liverpool can see the exact sites and the exact type of industries that we could bring onto those sites already. So our ask going down the line, I think, really, can we do a phase 2? Can we expand the number of tax sites? And, as Sir Chris says, simplistically, well, if we're going to regenerate an area, if we can create 10,000 jobs with 3 tax sites, well, why not create 20,000 jobs and double up? And that immediately gives us straight takes us into a 10, 15-year plan. And also, perhaps at odds with some of the other free ports around the country, our designs around the custom sites and our pipeline, if you like, of customers just grows by the week. It's been a bit of a slow burn, the custom site benefits, as Richard said. There are some similar reasons, but we're finding out that the scale and the scope of the inquiries we're getting from major energy companies from other parts of the world, so shipping in various types of gas as a consequence of the change in landscape in a global economy, and in terms of onshoring and nearshoring our energy requirements away from the Russia and Central Europe. This is new news, and this is sort of breaking news, really. We're getting these kind of inquiries, and they're saying, well, if we bring in 100,000 tons of X onto a port terminal over the water that's not being used for a few years, could we create a custom site there? And they're quite ambitious questions to be asking the government, but this sort of changes the whole landscape in terms of custom site offerings, really. And this is almost bigger than a Liverpool thing. This is a UK government policy, and right now, our conversations with HMRC have been very encouraging. So we have these inquiries, they look into them, and right now the answer could be a maybe. So that changes everything, and it almost changes our business plan really, because of the scale and the scope of these inquiries are unprecedented and something I don't think any of us expected to see.
Well, think of us first on the journalist team here when one of them comes to fruition. I've got to say that sounds very, very interesting.
Well, can I just come in on some of the points that John said? Because I absolutely agree with him in terms of timescale. You know what? I mean, as far as Gateway 14 is concerned, as I said earlier, that is probably going to fit well within the timescale of the existing Freeports, and we hope it will be completed in 4 or 5 years. But then when I think about what we're looking at in the East Midlands and some of the sites there, that is going to take a significant amount of time to come forward, and it could be decades. And so I do think it's very important that there is some flexibility in the timescale of these Freeports, because remember, it's sort of 5 years and then it starts to peter out. Some of these things will take a lot longer. It's hugely important. There's no doubt about it. From we're talking to occupiers as to how these things come forward. But I think for some of the Freeports in particular, they will take a lot longer than that 5 years to come forward really significantly to work. So I think it's important that we see some flexibility from the government in how they come forward.
And I guess there's broad political support for it. There's not, the cross-party support for Freeports and the idea of it as well, which is obviously important given the time horizon.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think you're right. It's an easy thing to get cross-party support for, but certainly in the conversations I've had with central government, they want to see people delivering, and they want to see us moving them forward. I am slightly concerned that there's a lot of sort of process that is being built into this, where government's saying you've got to do this, you've got to do that. And obviously the process is important, but this is all about delivery. We are here, John and I and people like that, we're here about delivery. And process is important, but you've got to have the right sort of process to make sure that you're actually there, you're delivering, things are happening on the ground. Now we've started to deliver at Gateway 14, which is great. But in some of the other ports, there's still a lot to be done. There's a lot to be sorted out, and we'll probably talk about infrastructure later. But there's all that. Well, there's a huge amount in the back of behind these things, actually to get them to start delivering on the ground.
Okay, well, we've had a first question in, and it's on a sort of topic that you've already touched on, Chris, which I was going to come to at some stage anyway. But the question itself is, how is the net zero carbon ambition being embedded within Freeports? And I guess that ties in with just how are Freeports ensuring the industrial and logistics sectors continue a journey towards becoming cleaner and greener? What work's going into that? And I'd probably maybe come to you, John, first on that.
Yeah, sure. And it's a valid question and a good question. The criteria for all the Freeports is that we have to, in our DNA, have some valid and current net zero projects in terms of decarbonisation freight movements within our areas. So for us, we'll be introducing a trial of hydrogen HGVs within the city region. So obviously, as we create these new freight corridors in and out of the city, there's a huge amount of work on into passenger transport and green connections with passenger transport with our region. But although transport and pollution from HGVs is a recognised issue in all areas of the country, there's actually not a great deal being done about it. So our ask is really that we have a combined project around as many Freeports around the country as possible to sort of roll this out and start seeing how the benefits and as a trial, like all trials, what works, what doesn't work, and how it's done. But I think what the Freeports will give to this is an impetus to start something. And as Chris says, we need to start doing things now. We can't just spend more and more millions of pounds worth on research saying, yes, we know that diesel trucks are a pollutant. We know that. Now is the time to start looking for alternatives. And also in our area, we've got 3 global gateways with the different modes of transport. And our secondary net zero work is based on the modal shift from road to rail as much as possible, which works. We've got some quite good rail connections, but we've also got one glaring gap in between the port and the West Coast Main Line, which is something that needs to be addressed to really start a shift in freight from the port. But because of the Freeport's tax sites, most of the new additional traffic will not be coming in or out of the port. It'll be going via the airport or via the rail terminal that we have anyway. And our biggest tax site at Parkside, which is St Helens, is there's plans to have that rail connected as well. So very much focused on modal shift and decarbonising the road freight logistics within our region.
Thanks, John. Richard, would you pick up on that? What's being built into Freeports in this area?
Yeah, sorry, Paul. Can you just recap? Is this the carbon net zero?
Yeah, and how they're helping industrial move towards being greener as well as that.
I think without sort of kind of raining on the question, I don't think that's necessarily a kind of required outcome of Freeports. There certainly isn't a kind of metrics to measure that. However, it's an aspirational policy.
Yeah,
and I think there will be some sort of political, I don't want to use the word pressure, but kind of expectation that Freeports are doing something in this sphere. And I'd imagine that when the grouping of Freeports get together in future periods, and I'm sure they will be able to kind of have high-level meetings with government officials and ministers, and when they've got asks about a future policy. So Chris mentioned about, maybe more that's going to be done. John talked about things up in that 25-year period. I think there will be kind of expectations they'll act in this sphere. As an example of the sort of areas they might be able to get involved in quite easily, and certainly in particular parts of the country, offshore renewable energy is a great opportunity, perhaps not so much for Sir Chris and in East Midlands, but for those seaports or those coastal areas, if there are things going to be anchored in the maritime element, servicing and developing and growing the offshore renewables wind farm sector, I think is something you'll certainly see a bit of movement in, and probably particularly in places like Scotland when we get Freeports there. I think that's part of their offer and bids, depending where they are. But yeah, I think it's TBC, I would say, Paul. But I don't think Freeports are under any illusion that they're going to be just given a free hit and can't think about decarbonisation, because as well as that central government aspiration, you'll also have those local stakeholders, local authorities. John mentioned his 6. They no doubt will have interests in greening, their regions, etc. And I think that will filter through. And the Freeports, even if I don't think they want to avoid it, but even if they did want to avoid it, I think that would be quite difficult.
Okay, and Chris, you've already mentioned that people you're talking to are very interested, or one of the appeals is this will focus on sustainability as well. But I just ask you this because how is a net zero carbon emission being embedded in Freeports?
Yeah, I mean, I do think it's extremely important. I mean, it's just important for all of us, for the whole of society, that actually that's the way we drive it forward. As far as the Freeports are concerned, the important thing is that you get the right infrastructure in there. They're encouraging the people one is talking to, getting. The buildings, any buildings we build will have facility for full solar on the roofs, all that sort of thing. But I suppose the most encouraging thing is, and using the range as an example at Gateway 14, they are very, very keen to have a sustainable building business as is possible. So, for instance, we're talking about this building, as I say, 1.17 million square feet. It's going to be BREEAM excellent. We require any occupier to be BREEAM very good, but we're going for BREEAM excellent. There will be solar panels on the roofs. 25% of the spaces will be suitable for EV. They're looking at possibly of getting electric trucks as well. So there's a huge amount going on, and I think the important thing as far as the sort of those delivering the Freeports concerned is that we make sure we work with those occupiers so that they can deliver everything that they want, which they're now getting under considerable pressure from their customers. It's very important to those businesses. So the big businesses are probably fine. Some of the smaller businesses may need a bit more encouragement, may need a bit more help, and that's where the those delivering the Freeports really need to make sure they help and work with those, perhaps some of the smaller occupiers, to enable them to be as carbon net zero as is possible.
Okay, I wanted to pick up on another thing you mentioned, said we'd come to it. So, is additional infrastructure going to be needed to, make sure Freeports really maximise their potential. And what would you like to see there? And I'd come to you, Chris. Yeah.
Yes, I mean, well, particularly looking at the situation in the East Midlands, there is an enormous amount of extra infrastructure that needs to come forward, and that is the East Midland Development Company, which it was announced in the Queen's speech, this possibility of locally led urban development corporations. We hope that MDEV will be one of the first of those. But, if you look at an area like the East Midlands and the 3 sites that are part of the Freeport there. Now, those sites could come forward and probably will come forward as part of the market. But the important thing, of course, is to bring those forward in the right way, because we're talking about logistics and industrial here. You've got to bear in mind the communities that there are around them that support them, where the employees come from, all that sort of thing. And therefore, the infrastructure in terms of how you bring these forward are very, very important. I mean, we're very lucky in the East Midlands that HS2 is coming in close to the Ratcliffe-on-Soar site. That is a fantastic thing for the East Midlands. We have just been given an extra £1 million by the government to look at the impact that will have on what is required for the infrastructure. That is going to be vital to making sure that we make the best of the Freeport. It works for all the sites, but also that it works for the communities as well. And if you don't get the infrastructure right, then that can be, it can have a hugely detrimental effect. And for instance, we're supporting Nottingham City Council, who just put in a bid for 40 million for a new access road as part of the sites in the East Midlands. All those sorts of things vital in maximising the value of the Freeports.
Thanks very much, Chris. John, I mean, Northwest Liverpool, obviously there's a load of things on your wish list, I guess. What's the, is there a danger sort of as soon as you get Freeport status that you forget that there's all these other things that need to happen to help a Freeport happen, and you need to still keep talking about them? And what do you need?
I'm kind of optimistic that because of the geography of the Freeports and the free zones, and as Sir Chris said about the East Midlands, it should be easier than ever before for the policy teams and the planning teams and the central government to start thinking about the connectivity between our Freeports, because the connectivity and the ease of freight movements around the country, this is essential to net zero ambitions. It's all very well, but one of the hardest things you can do in the logistics sector is move from road to rail, and it should be far easier to create that rail infrastructure than what it is now. It's for us. We've got a very strong start on this, as is East Midlands, I believe, but it could be better. So there's a huge amount of discussion about how much freight could be moved onto rail. Well, my personal belief is it's not being sweated as an asset anywhere near to its capacity, really, and that's something that is a central government issue, really, to force that through. And I think what the Freeports will do, it will highlight some of these, let's say, the blockers to modal shift, to really a custom site operator at a port, but in Freeport, from Felixstowe, for example, to our multimodal site at 3MG, that should be easing friction at the port of Felixstowe itself or Southampton, because you move from a Freeport custom site to a custom site. The whole principle of Freeport is the ease of movements of goods. So if it's to make the most of our Freeports, well, let's sort of encourage them and keep that going. And as Sir Chris says, let us get on with the job of delivering sort of easier freight movements around the UK, and give us the tools that we'll need to do that. Yes, we're putting down the framework now on a regional level, but within 2-3 years, we really need to be starting looking at our national infrastructure. But I am hopeful that the Freeports will start showing up these sort of glaring emissions, or bottlenecks where we could do things much better.
Okay, that's really, really interesting. And just to bring Richard in here, I know, Richard, you've spoken a lot, and you mentioned earlier that it seems that government is limiting Freeports for the moment to the numbers that have been talked about. You're very passionate about the idea that there should be more, I think, or maybe I've read the wrong comment there, but I certainly saw it. I just wanted, one question is what also should be done, and it's not to be in any way, holding back Freeports, but to help make sure existing economies aren't.
Paul, I've lost you there, but I think I got the gist of your question. And I don't know if Sir Chris and John, we're going to have to divvy up. If we have lost Paul, we might have to share the chairing duties. But yeah, we can.
We can do it. We can do it.
Yeah. So yeah, Paul, your question. Yes, first of all, we are passionate about the concept and the vision of Freeports, and very much in the the sort of all-encompassing business-friendly zones, etc. So not just the trade easements, which welcome by some, but some already have those tools. In terms of this sort of the future agenda, just coming back on infrastructure, actually, one thing I would say, I think John's absolutely right. And what we'll see in the sort of post-Brexit era, I think the government now will start to reassess its own infrastructure and transport policies. We're, of course, under the European Union, we were part of things like the 10T programme, which prioritised our sort of strategic transport network, seaports, airports, main sort of passenger gateways, freight activities, hubs, etc. And there is a growing move to look at how you do that on just a simply UK basis, and very much linking up the four regions as well in an aspiration to keep the country together in this sort of interesting time. And I think within that, you'll start to see regular assessments of where, government already does this under various roads authorities and rail networks, etc. But I think there'll be more focus on those strategic gateways and routes. And that could prioritise the Freeports, because if they're having an increase in either trade, it could be, or just generally local or regional economic activity, I don't think you'll be able to hide from the fact that will create traffic and transport needs, etc. And I would expect that government then would respond, not because they're a Freeport, but because that region may be busier and have certain transport needs. And I think then you will find, funding allocations will be channeled in a kind of non-Freeport way, but invariably Freeports, if it's a successful policy, as many think it will be, could benefit from that wider transport infrastructure and other digital connectivity infrastructure, energy infrastructure, which the country sadly really needs. And I think Freeports will enable their regions to certainly state the case for those offers. So that's Paul. You're back with us, so you can.
Yeah, it was weird. That I don't know what happened there. Some gremlin in the works, but yeah, I was frantically looking for the link again. But yeah, sounds like you answered it well anyway. What I was hearing.
I'll pretend I did, Paul. But over to you again. Thanks.
Well, yeah, and obviously we already, I've got loads of questions to ask you here, and we're already coming up against it. But I guess I wanted to also ask, for all the listeners on, I don't know what sectors they work in and all the rest of it, but I presume this isn't just going to benefit, logistics and industrial. It's going to be, a much wider impact. And so I just wanted to, ask everyone involved, how can other sectors benefit from the introduction of Freeports? Maybe come to Chris first. So Chris there first.
Yeah, thanks, Paul. Yes, I think it is important that one looks, first of all, looking at sort of the manufacturing sector or whatever. One of the things you're doing at Gateway 14 is we'll be putting in an innovation centre, which might be a sort of a building of 30,000 square feet, where a new business can go in and just rent a room or whatever. So it's all very well looking at the 1.1 million square foot buildings. You've got to be able to do the small buildings as well, and then also you've got to look and see how businesses in the area can benefit from the new occupiers coming in. So there are a lot of ways of doing that, and we certainly, as far as Gateway 14 is concerned, we're prioritising the use of local businesses and everything else. And if you think about something like the range, where we're looking at perhaps about 1,700 jobs in 3 shifts, well, that's a hell of a lot of people to come in. And possibly in the short term, they may not all come from the local area, but over the longer term, it will start to have enormous benefits. That some of these are very high value jobs, it'll have great benefit to the area there as well. So, I mean, there to an extent with some of the Freeports, one will get businesses perhaps expanding and moving into it. That then leaves other areas where you can regenerate them and whatever. So thinking about, as far as Freeports are concerned, it's very important not to just think about them as the sites themselves. It's about the whole area, about the whole region, what it can do for that, and regenerating a whole area. And that's certainly, as far as East Midlands is concerned, that's what we're looking at. This is a real catalyst to regenerate the whole area. And as I just said earlier as well, the important thing to remember as well is the communities that surround it, because it's not just about industrial logistics, it's about the people who work there, the people who take the goods from them, whatever. And you've got the whole thing, you've got to work together in a holistic fashion, making sure that it works well for the communities as well.
Okay, and Richard, I guess you'd agree with all of that.
Very much, yeah. Chris, absolutely right. I think, slightly amusing. It's just one anecdote, but one of the potential, when I was at one of the party conferences, the Tory conference last year, there was a kind of question about, do you think that sort of trickle-down effect, as Chris was articulating, that communities will benefit from, initially, obviously from industrial investment and potentially things like logistics you mentioned, but that trickle-down will have a benefit on local communities where there would be a higher amount of money going into local communities, local businesses. And there was a slightly throwaway comment that made me amused that one of the Freeport locations, potential locations in Scotland, was saying, do you think we'll have a Waitrose? That's although it's a slightly snobby kind of association, I think that articulates, you get things like that. And there's been, at the same event, people were talking about perhaps there will be more investment in green spaces, leisure facilities, schools, public services. If you've got population changes, and I don't want to get ahead of myself, but if we are talking 25-year plans here, you are going to see that local infrastructure in those regions move up. And the value of those properties in those regions, of course, will be impacted. So whether that's business, commercial or residential. So all in all, without getting ahead of ourselves, Paul, it's quite an exciting concept if it all does come off.
Indeed. John, is that what you're building into your projections for Liverpool and the surrounding areas?
I mean, the ethos of all the Freeports is regional regeneration. So there's various modelling being done for all the Freeports. A number of jobs going to be created, but in our region, we still have unfortunately got a high unemployment rate, which means that we can take that to our advantage, if that could ever be an advantage, because compared to perhaps a more remote or rural Freeport, if you created 10, 15,000 jobs somewhere where there's already maximum employment, that could be an issue. Whereas we've got a fair bit of slack reasonably to take up, and we know there's going to be a skills gap already because there is right throughout the country in every type of sector. As part of our rollout, we're doing the Freeport Skills Academy, so we are investing in addressing that skills gap on a local basis. So we're working with the universities, colleges, the communities, etc. So again, that's part of our DNA and our rollout. So this is very much locally focused, and one of the I keep saying, as this evolves and the momentum continues, we're seeing a significant amount of interest from professional services in our region. So the planners, the architects, the financial entities, legal companies. The interest is there because anything that's be this big in a big bang regeneration, lots of infrastructure, lots of changes, lots of potential new businesses, lots of new money coming in from around the world, lots of expansion, we hope, from existing businesses. This is a big bang to the good rather than the catastrophic challenges we've faced for the last 3 to 4 years, really. So that the interest on the ground amongst our professional business services is significant. And we're approached on a daily basis. How do we find out more? How do we get involved? When the infrastructure starts, and so on and so on. So it's the scope and scale of this is colossal, really.
And a lot of that work is already focused on education of local people about what roles there are here and skilling up for them and so forth as well, across all of these Freeports, isn't it? I think I've read quite a bit about that.
Yeah. I mean, all the Freeports, as Richard mentioned before, green energy is on the fore, and in our small example of a hydrogen vehicle. So, what's the back office for that going to look like? Who's going to support them? Who's going to keep them on the road? I understand it's difficult enough with electric vehicles. Never mind, in private cars. Once you start moving commercial vehicles, or we start looking at the decarbonisation of the maritime sector and the port itself, what these jobs are going to look like, we frankly don't know yet. So we need to move very, very fluidly alongside these new businesses and as new demands as come through, because the technology is moving to such a pace. And some of the new types of business sectors we're looking to attract to our region, they don't exist outside the Middle East yet. So we would perhaps it's a risky strategy to introduce a business sector that has a 100% skills gap in Europe, never mind in Liverpool. But we're ambitious, and we will be working with those potential future employers all the way through to make sure that this is a success.
Okay, now I have a question for all of you to take in a kind of broad brush one here now as we sort of move towards the end of this debate. Basically, wanted to know, what do you think, all of you, will be the key driver in ensuring Freeports are a success and deliver growth? I'll come back to you, John, first. What's going to be the most important thing?
There's got to be long-term political support for it from central government. So, as you said earlier on, if there's changing governments, I can't imagine any change in government leading to unravelling the regeneration of port city regions, which have been in need of regeneration for 30, 40 years. I don't think that would allow
It's not a vote winner.
No. So I think inherently it may be called different names in the future, but this has to be a long-term view. And you've seen there's some 5,000 Freeports around the world. They are never short-term wins, as I think it's Chris said, but you're looking probably 5 to 6 years before our tax sites get nearly full, because you're talking about thousands of acres around the country that's going to be developed starting next year. I think the earliest ones will be. So this is, by default, it's going to be a 5-year rollout of the infrastructure itself. Never mind the net zero projects and so on and so on. So, by its very nature, this is a long-term strategy, and it needs to be supported as such from successive governments, central governments, and also on a local area. But I think the local arena in terms of politics will change immediately, as Sir Chris is saying. Once you start saying, "Oh, well, that Freeport has created 1,700 jobs already," and it's within its first 6 months of launch, that will set the scene locally, really.
And you talked about sort of the many Freeports around the world. Is there specific best practice you would point to, just quickly to ask you, where that one was amazing in that particular city? Or
and there's different models and different business models and different applications of the Freeports around the world. Some of them sort of major on the tax benefits, some of them major on the customs benefits, and those models are to suit the geography or the economy or the purpose of what the Freeport has been created for. So if ours is being created to create jobs, which at the forefront it is, and to create these, basically we're a trading nation, and our ports were at the centre of this trading nation 100 years ago, and we need to, forgive me, Richard, but we need to re-establish ourselves as a global player, and our ports do, really. So if that's our starter for 10, if that's our first goal that we need to tick, we need to backfill that, and we need to have the right policies and the right legislation to support that. In terms of in the Middle East, where they really, really like in Dubai, I think it's the free zones are going to contribute some $65 billion to the economy there by 2030. That's in a very, very small country, Dubai, but they really, really leverage their free zones to attract businesses and clusters. So they'll create a free zone with specific benefits for that site that no other business can outcompete them. So if you're in the e-commerce world, for example, and the benefits you have in terms of tax and customs benefits on that site, no Amazon or no other company like that could ever outcompete what you have, that inherent competitive advantage on that site. And if we can get somewhere close to that in the UK, we really have got something to shout about that.
Okay, Richard, just coming to you now with that question as well. What do you think will be the key driver in ensuring free ports are a success and deliver growth?
Yeah, as John said, I think he's absolutely right. Time is a very important factor, and also I would say it's ironically, despite it, the Freeports policy is about reducing burdens and making things easier to do. This is ironically still an interventionist policy from government, because it's intervening in a sector that freight, shipping, maritime, logistics, industrial activity, which it doesn't typically intervene in. It's usually the private sector runs that. So I would say, it probably, without having a go at any free port at the moment, I'm not suggesting there are problems at all, but I think we have to remember that they should be there should be an element of industry-led activity, and the expectations and the onus must be on industry to lead the investment, etc. With that, very able guidance and steering from the Freeport directors like John, who will make sure that everybody's on the straight and narrow, etc. But he's out there championing what they're doing. And I think that sort of balance will be quite important to achieve. And then just on your second point, Paul, that John was talking about, and John will know far more about this than me because he's been and met many of these different free ports and free trade zones around the world. But I always say, just remember, the thing that makes the UK is not unique on one level, but we are an import-driven economy. Despite Brexit, despite the pandemic, we're still a very successful economy. I say we're import-driven. We have a very, kind of affluent consumer market. We don't produce as much as we may have previously done in years gone by because of, economic and policy developments. But let's have a look at what suits us. So transshipment may not necessarily work at this time, but I mentioned offshore renewable wind, and there's going to be other things we can seize and get involved in this new era. So I think it's all well and good looking at other free ports, but we are going to have to kind of pan out and develop our own sort of strategy somewhat. Although, John, if you want to go and look at the free ports around the Caribbean or other places, I'll be with you as well.
I could come and look at that as well.
Yeah, I'm sure all the listeners as well will be sending you an email about that. So Chris as well. What do you think is going to be the key factor in it all being a success?
Well, I mean, I'd agree, obviously, with John and Richard, and as we've discussed already, the longevity of the process is hugely important, because some of these things are going to take a long time to bring forward. And again, as Richard said, how the free ports manage their occupiers and everything is very important. But to me, the absolute key thing in this is central government. Now, we have at Gateway 14, just looking at sort of the full business case approval and everything like that, we've had an awful lot of stuff come in from central government asking to do this, saying we're going to have to do that, we're going to have to get occupiers to come up with that. It's hugely intrusive, and it's going too far, to be absolutely frank. This is about one of the problems that both central and local government have is, as I mentioned earlier, this focus on process. This is not about process. Process is, of course, important. And yes, I recognize that it's important that, we have to monitor what the free ports are delivering, what the occupiers are doing and everything else. But that must not be so intrusive that occupiers look at it and think, well, okay, we've got the tax advantages, but gosh, this is going to be so difficult to take forward. So there needs to be a reasonable approach from the central government, which absolutely focuses on delivery, because that's what John and I are looking to deliver forward, and I'm sure Richard as well. And I suppose that is one of the things that does concern me, is that the government will say, well, we've got to do this, we've got to have this information, we've got to do that. Get it right, guys. Let's actually focus on the delivery and making sure that it's, because as Richard was saying, it's about the occupiers, it's about the businesses. That's what all this is about. That's what's going to drive the local growth, improve the local communities and everything else. We've got to make it as easy as we can for them to deliver those businesses.
Okay, and I think somebody was talking about, all of the 8 or how many we get with the devolved free ports all getting together in a kind of club and then talking to government. Is that already happening? I guess you can, as a one voice, can tell them, well, there's too much of this and we don't need that. And is that relationship already developing?
I'm not sure that it has developed particularly. I'm lucky I'm involved in two of the Freeports. Obviously, John's involved with one, and I think it is very important that the Freeports get together. To be fair to D-Lux,
in the Caribbean, maybe on that.
That might be a little bit more difficult to justify, but I do think it's very important that the Freeports work together. And as I was saying, to be fair to D-Lux, the Department of Levelling Up, they are encouraging those Freeports to work together. As far as I'm aware, there isn't any sort of Freeport organisation which is pulling it all together. I may be wrong. John, you may have more information on that.
Yeah, we could provide a ferry across the Mersey if that helps. Yes, absolutely right. This is a timeline thing. So there's maybe 4 or 5 of us permanent heads of, directors, CEOs, etc., of the various Freeports. So the others are still being run by the consultants or various reps from the combined authorities where they've been created from. So I think until as this evolves, and the evolvement is happening very, very quickly now, where we can, we absolutely 100% do need to start coming together as a collective, as an association, federal, whatever that is called, but we need to start speaking as one, really. And it's going to be, the government will need us to be as one, so that they can discuss with us as they do with the Ports Association via Richard's organisation, etc. So, and we need to start the work on that this year, really. Although I think it'll probably be into middle of next year before all the permanent heads of Freeports around the country are organised. But of course, it's a growing policy. So once Scotland and Wales and hopefully Northern Ireland come onto board, this group of us will grow and will become more influential and more important that we speak as one.
Okay, well, thank you all so much for that. There's loads of interesting things coming down the track. So obviously, I'll be personally very interested to write about them. But thank you so much. Really interesting. And I believe now it's time to pass over to Shelley to kind of point us in the direction of what's happening next.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Paul. Yes, thank you, Paul, and to our panel for a great discussion this morning. Really great. Before we leave today's session, I just wanted to make you aware of our final session today. At 2 p.m, we ask, how can digital platforms and data be harnessed to modernise planning and engagement? Brought to you in association with Commonplace. If you can't make that session or have missed any key sessions this week that you really wanted to see, do not fear. All sessions will be recorded and available on our YouTube channel by tomorrow. Just search Real Estate Live UK to stay up to date. Also follow us on LinkedIn, and just like on YouTube, search for Real Estate Live UK. So thank you all of you panel and all of you joining today. We look forward to seeing you again soon.